Good morning. My name's Robert Wood. I'm with the Goschenhoppen historians here at the Henry Antes Plantation in Upper Frederick Township, Montgomery County. This 1736 house was built by pioneer settler and early reformer in this region, Johann Heinrich Antes, who arrived in 1720 along with his father, Philip Frederick Antes, and his sister Elizabeth. This house was built in 1736, which is very early for this region. This was wilderness at the time. And it's on the National Registry of Historic Places for two reasons. One, it's the home of Henry Antes, and two, it's one of the finest examples of very early domestic stone architecture, Germanic architecture in the region. It's also the site here of the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival. The Goschenhoppen Folk Festival is probably the most authentic of the midsummer festivals celebrating the history, heritage, and lore of the Pennsylvania Germans in this area. We've, from the start, and it started around in the 1960s, have made an effort to keep it absolutely authentic. The demonstrators are all experts in their field. For example, the gunsmith is in fact a gunsmith making flintlock rifles. The harness maker is in fact a harness maker, and so on. So if you're interested in authentic 18th and 19th century Pennsylvania German folk culture, the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival is a don't miss. You can just go online, find Goschenhoppen Historians Inc., and there'll be a lot of information there about the folk festival and other things. The house here is remarkable. It's 1736, and it is on the National Registry of Historic Places, as I said, I think for two reasons. It's the home of Henry Antes, and also it's the best example of early domestic architecture in this area, of the Germanic style. It has the footprint or the style of many Germanic houses, early Germanic houses in this area. It has the heavy central firewall going up through the middle of the house, and the chimneys are in the middle of the house rather than the gable ends, which is more in the English tradition. Let's take a look inside. We've preserved this as an architectural museum, more so than trying to interpret the daily life of someone here in 1750. And there are many interesting features that are preserved yet in the fabric of the house. Come on in. We're here in the kitchen now of the Henry Antes house by the cooking fireplace. Of course, in those days, in 1736, all cooking was done on a hearth like this, and there may have been 20 or 30 people fed out of this hearth. Stoves were a long way from being invented yet. All cooking was done on the hearth, on the flat hearth on the floor. Many features are interesting. In the back of the hearth there, which we'll see when we get over on the other side in the good room, there's an opening where wood was put in to feed a 5-plate stove. Almost all of these early Germanic houses had the good room, the Stube it was called in Dutch. The good room was heated by a 5-plate stove, which we'll see when we get over there. The massive chimney goes up 4 stories above us, and this heavy lintel holds up a lot of weight in that chimney above there. In those days, people did not hang out in the kitchen as we do today. This kitchen was food preparation and food storage only. It was sort of smoky and kind of unpleasant, I think. In these German-style houses, the kitchen was usually on the cold northern and western side of the house, and the good living room was on the warm southern and eastern side. And this was not a place where you would have hung out. This was a work area where food was prepared. Now we're in the Stube in Pennsylvania Dutch, or the good living room of the Henry Antes house. This was the room where they lived, worked, ate, entertained, and it was, well, in short, the living room. It was heated by this 5-plate stove. This is, of course, a reproduction that we had made. The 5-plate stove sat here, the front of it sat here, and the back of it sat back there, and it was mortared into the wall. It was fed from the kitchen fireplace. There's no door, there's no stovepipe. It was about a 400-pound cast iron heater that kept the room nice and toasty and warm with very little wood. When that stove originally set here, There's a hole in the top of the stove there, and that fed the smoke and the heat up into this little chimney that goes up through the wall. On top of the stove, there was a tile, probably, or brick, they called an aufsatz, a piece sitting on top of the stove that served as an additional heater. And like I say, the smoke went up there, the stove sat here, and a little bit of wood kept the room very nice and warm. One like that was probably here. It may, in fact, have been that very stove may have sat here, because I live a few miles up the Swamp Creek from here, and on my farm in the shanty, we used that as a fire back. Well, I didn't, but before I was there. And that is the end plate of this stove here. And when these plates are found in the Mercer Museum in Doylestown, they said that this that plate, the side plates, were found a few miles from Boyertown. So it may well have been a stove like that was here. Like I said, this is an architectural museum. And I like to keep it without putting it in where it would have been, because once we cement that in and mortar it into the wall there, we ruin the fabric of this location. And I think by having it sitting here, we can interpret it both ways. We can say, this is the stove, this is how it worked, this is the markings on it and the writing on it. It sat here, and you can show how it worked. And we haven't changed or altered the fabric of where it sat originally. That broken stove plate was from my farm, and we can get the text on one side. The other side is rotted off. There's one other plate like that in the world in the Mercer Museum in Doylestown, and that luckily has the other side of the text is still legible. And what that says in Dutch or German was, when blessed Philadelphia began, it took this emblem, which it now passes down. And then to get the length we needed in the bottom is broken off. We just added 1736, the date of the house. And we put on in Dutch, in Pennsylvania German dialect, "Wir hoffen noch ein besseren Zeit." We hope for a better time. The side of the plate here is actually, it's the Port of Philadelphia. Originally, these were open cast. That is, they weren't cast in a flask like modern casting, but there would be a pattern that would be pressed down in the sand of the furnace, and the iron, the liquid iron, would just run into there almost like a big puddle. And when it cooled, it kept the impression of the pattern that was pressed down in the sand. And it says, in Dutch it says, whatever does not come from God is sin. Mark well, you false heart, don't waste an hour. In Dutch it was, was nicht zu Gottes Glauben geht, ist Sünde. Merk auf, du falsches Herz, verlehre keine Stunde. It's a rhymed poem. And then down in the bottom it says, De überkluge Welt versteht doch deine Worten. The over-clever world forgets truly not this truth. It sucht and findet Kath and lets the Perle fahren. It seeks and finds trash and lets the pearls go. It's a rhymed poem. I've seen that at other places too. The poem is not original to the person who carved the original pattern. So that's a 5-plate stove. Anyone interested in 5-plate stoves can go to the Mercer Museum in Doylestown. There are hundreds of them that Henry Mercer had rescued about the time of World War I, where they were being collected for scrap. As we go around the room here, there are all sorts of interesting features that amazingly are still here. Here's an original 1736 door frame, and also original door, 2 panels. The windows over here, the sides of the window case opening do not come straight out, but they're splayed out this way to let more light in. The floorboards here are replaced. This is about 1820 floorboards, but over in the room next door we have the original 1736 white oak flooring. This partition wall here is original, and many of the other features in the room here are also original. We're in the Kammer of the first floor of the Henrietti's house here. Kammer would be the bedroom. In most houses, this was like the master bedroom because it was warmed by the stove next door, in the other room. I don't know if Henry ever used this as a bedroom. It may have been an office. So Henrietti's was, among other things, a religious leader, a civic leader, a social leader. He was also an engineer and a builder. He had built a mill down here in the Swamp Creek, and there are, on the wall over there, there are gear patterns, I think, circular gear patterns put on with like a giant compass, and those are of interest. There's also a graffiti there. There are HA initials here and there. In 1750, there would have been a high post curtain bed like this. This is the high post bed, but it lacks the curtains. But it would have been a curtain bed with a straw tick and so on. Once again, the historians have made no effort to make, I don't know, pretty it up. It's an architectural museum. And with these stone walls like this, 18-inch thick stone walls, they really didn't hold paint. And what they used to do was whitewash them. Whitewash is lime and water, and put a coating of that on, and it would be nice and bright and white until it wasn't anymore. And then you go over it again with another coating of whitewash and make it nice and new again. Analysis showed that the very first coatings of whitewash on there were actually from burned clamshells. There were mountains of clamshells along the Delaware Bay left by the Native Americans, and they would burn those to make lime and plaster in the very beginning. The room here is really set up not to display or to interpret 18th century daily living, but more or less as things that are useful for the festival, for the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival, where the house here is open to the public and we have visitors, so we can explain and talk about various aspects of the house at that time. Now we're in the second floor of the Antes house, and we're in what was probably the schoolroom for 1745 to 1750. Henry donated the building here for use as a Moravian boys' school. He was much instrumental in getting the Moravians started in Bethlehem. And many interesting features. Here's an original door, 1736 door, panel door, 2 panels, and the original door, pegged door frame. If we move around over this way, we notice that they've got these original white oak floors, many of them quarter sawn. So these boards are about 18 inches wide, and that's a quarter. They were quarter sawn, so the original tree was twice that wide. These were huge oak trees. Over here, probably there was a 5-plate stove here, just like there was downstairs. This partition would not have been there, and both rooms here would have been a schoolroom, probably. This heavy summer beam here, interestingly, cracked soon after they put it in, and rather than putting a post underneath it, they hung it from one of the trusses in the attic, and it's actually hanging rather than a post underneath it. This wall comes out. This is an original wall, and that can be easily taken out and have one big room. It's an interesting feature over here. Every room had these little wall cabinets, and this is an original one that was left, that wasn't basically taken out of the building or stolen. Well, the historians got the building and they rescued this one and took it out. And I always like to point out there's some very delicate carving and tracery here on the metal latch on the inside where it doesn't show in typical German fashion. It's very carefully formed and decorated. A nice little cabinet. Another really interesting feature, I think, is that this is the only early Germanic house I know that has insulation paling between the second floor and the attic, which is this here. These joists have a groove cut in them, and there are boards across there, and there's a fill of clay and stone on top and plaster on the bottom, and it provides insulation between this floor and the floor above. It holds the heat here rather than letting it go up. Most German houses have that type of paling between the cellar and the first floor, but this one has that between the cellar and the first floor, and also between the second and third floor. Still on the second floor of the Antes house, we're going to go up in the attic, but before we go up there, I wanted to point out some features of the attic door. Here is, of course, the latch, the forged latch, and like all of these latches, there's a little X here. It's an apotropaic. It's thought to be a way to protect from evil. And the term apotropaic is a new term, but it's a protection. It's sort of like a talisman or a protection from evil. You'll find that X cut into all of these latches. 1736 door, tapered and dovetailed batten inlet into the boards of the door, and one here, and of course one down there. It's to keep the boards of the door from sagging or twisting or warping, and by golly, that's been here since 1736, and the door is absolutely flat and true and unwarped. Some nice features here. Here's a little latch. Here's a little hole here. A little bit of like a wire would have been down here, and you could be upstairs. And you could open and close this. Take the wire away, and nobody could get in. It was like a lock to the upstairs. Original hardware, forged. I'd just like to point out too that there are leather washers here in these pindles. They're used as spacers to get the distance right between the two different pindles, but also that keeps the door operating nice and smoothly. And those are original washers, probably. Okay, let's go upstairs to the attic. We're in the attic of the house now, and I want to point out this liegender Dachstuhl, or in Dutch, in English it would be a leaning roof seat. These trusses are very heavy. It sort of has a medieval look, but you'll find this in some old houses and buildings in the area here. My guess is it may have been the same crew that did all of them because they're all almost identical. But they're remarkably, the joinery and the carpentry is remarkable. They're all fitted together with bird's beak and pegs, double pegged. There's a purlin that goes from this member to an identical member right over there. So my guess is, like I say, that there's one crew that did these all around the area because they're all very similar. If we come walking around and touring around here of course is the masonry of the chimney that goes all the way down to the first floor. Here we have original stairs leading from this attic up to the Speicher, or the grain storage area. There's a very small attic above. This is actually a 4-story building. And this is the original stairs going up here, all hand-cut and handmade. I'd mentioned downstairs on the second floor that the summer beam cracked somewhere along the line, and instead of putting a post underneath it to support that cracked beam, they hung it from a joist member above. And here's the post that's actually hanging and supporting that summer beam. Here's the metal frame that goes around the summer beam down there. And interestingly, it's not a bolt with a nut on it, but it's a bolt with a slot and wedge, which is the way furniture was made and put together too. It's a slot and wedge, and it's iron, and it's a unique feature. Over here is the opposite side here is the roof truss that of course goes over there. This heavy beam here tapers down. We see the same thing, that remarkable joinery. It's all identical on this and on other houses too. Looking out now through the kitchen door to the reproduction bake oven, which was on that very site, we think. Every Germanic house in the 18th and 19th centuries would have had a bake oven where huge amounts of breads, pies, pastries, dried fruit, and so on was baked or processed. Interestingly, unlike a pizza oven, the bake oven had no fire in it when the baking was going on. The housewife, early in the morning on Friday, on baking day, would go out and get a roaring wood fire going inside there for several hours, and then the embers and ashes were raked out, and the breads, pies, and whatever was going to be baked would be put in, and the residual heat that was left over, there's a heavy clay and masonry arch over the whole of the bake oven, and that residual heat coming out of that heavy clay arch is what did the baking. And like I say, those were everywhere. Every house, every property had a bake oven, and they all sort of worked the same way. There were many different designs, but they all worked the same. Heat it up really hot, rake the fire out, put the stuff in, and that's where it bakes. They were also used to dry. When they were done baking, they had drying frames that they would put in there with drying fruits and vegetables, whatever they're going to preserve for the winter. Of course, there was no freezing, and there was no canning at that early time. Preservation was done but mainly by drying. And so the bake oven was a baking and a drying structure. Beyond that, we can see the paling of the garden. Every house also had a kitchen garden where culinary herbs and medicinal herbs were grown. The Auntie's house is on the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival grounds here, 28 acres with the kitchen behind me and the barn behind there. And every year in August, the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival is held. I'm in my festival dress. It's a period dress where I docent inside the house. The grounds here are used by at least, well, the festival itself probably has 500 participants, several hundred children volunteers, and several hundred costumed or presenters in period dress. Being outdoors, of course, the festival is weather dependent, but it's rain or shine, it's on this year, August 12th and 13th. So, there we are. There's a brief overview of the Henry Andis House, the site, and the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival. To find out more information, you can just look up our website, goschenhoppenhistorians.org, or find us on social media, Facebook and other social media. And there we are. Thank you for joining us today, and hope to see you soon.